Okay, everybody, this is the video I think a lot of people look forward to every single year, at least the 4 or 5 years I've done this. Uh, Typically, I feel like for forecasting seasonality, right? I feel like we do a pretty decent job here. I don't not pertaining that everything every time I do this, it's going to be the most accurate. Half of this is probably wrong, but right. Last year, though, I really feel like I hit it out of the park. Feel like we did a pretty good job with things. So this year, I'm gonna admit a little bit more nervous because, quite honestly, I feel like we did such a good job last year that it's gonna be a hard one to follow. With that said, though, I think it's time to dive in and let's see what we're looking at. Okay, so where are we at right now? I always start these forecasts with that broad overview. And right now we do have weak La Nina conditions in the Pacific. We are coming off a historically busy tornado season on the plains. It was bonkers last year. I chased a lot. I think I'm still recovering. It's a lot. But we also have increasing drought now across the Southwest. Lots of drought. And we also have some very, very warm Gulf waters once again. So all those things are going to be interesting to see how it plays out. So let's take a look at oceanic conditions. If okay, there it is. Good. I was hoping my mouse pointer was going to work. I wasn't sure. Here's La Nina right here, right? Got this warm blob north of it. Even have a little bit of almost El Nino looking here on the eastern Pacific. This La Nina's centered a little bit further west than they typically are. That will play a role. Also, you see some warmness here across the Pacific still. And so the Pacific is in a pattern that favors some ridging, which will allow trucks to really amplify and dig in. You've seen it all winter long, it seems like, where we have a pretty southern storm track, basically storms riding right along the southern U.S. Had some snowstorms pretty far south this year, some really deep freezes, that sort of thing. That's not going to change. Not snow. I don't think we're going to see a lot of snow in the south going forward, but those big storm systems bringing in fronts and stuff to the Gulf, I don't think that's changing short term, which is going to put a damper on early activity. But take a look at the Gulf right now. There is some cold water still, just offshore. That's shown up throughout the winter. That's pretty normal. But overall, there's been a lot of warmth in the Gulf this winter. There's been a few cold periods. That time when that cold air really dove south, you had really, really cold temperatures January, then again in February. All those things have cooled the Gulf a little bit, but it has once again maintained itself through that. My guess is it recovers. It's pretty warm again on the other side of it, and we're going to see a warm Gulf going into the upcoming spring, okay? Taking a look here, this is the Gulf temperatures with time. This starts early December and goes all the way out to February 25th. Yeah, I don't know if I can fix that, but just know that there it is right there. You can see where the by date there. Big cool down there this last week. Obviously, the Gulf is going to cool, but you did see how warm it got as well, especially going into last week. I think we're heading into a pretty warm pattern, so the Gulf's probably going to be entering the upcoming season once again pretty warm. That's been a pretty normal occurrence over the last several seasons. Why is that important? That allows warmer waters, allow for warmer air, more moisture content, etc. Easier to get big time instability north, so that plays a pretty key role. Now, if you look at INSO, this is something people always are looking at. This is one of the ones that people really gravitate toward, El Nino, La Nina, right? Well, we have been in a La Nina pattern for a lot of the winter. Very weak, though. We did get down to about minus 1.5 at times on the Nino index, but you can see we are warming. This has been warming. This index is not as bouncy either. Having some trouble with my throat today. But this index is not going to bounce a lot. that warming is probably going to continue. If you take a look here, you can see that we are dealing with basically climate models, etc., all showing a gradual warming trend basically into neutral. These two dotted lines in between those is neutral, below La Nina, above El Nino. Well, most models by spring-ish have us entering into neutral. So we're going to be into a neutral spring coming off of a weak La Nina. That's going to play a part in this forecast. We're actually just about to get to that. So with that said, let's get to that. This involves analog years, right? When you're looking at analogs, you're thinking about things like current drought conditions, current oceanic conditions, what the storm tracks have been doing, precipitation over the winter, all these things. And so when you're taking all those into account, these are the years that match somewhat closely to where we're going. As this slide says, there's not any real incredibly strong matches this year. A lot of broad matches. A lot of broad pieces of the current conditions fit within several years. There's been a lot of hype on social media about 2011. It's happening. Super outbreaks, etc. You're going to find out in a second why I'm not buying into that sort of hype right now. But there's some pretty interesting years on this even still, okay? 1967, 1974, 1970, those are the older matches. 1974, famously, the first super outbreak. So, and then you have 1989, which is widely considered perhaps the worst storm chase season on the plains since storm chasing began. So just so you know, that's on here along with 2011. So that means, yeah. 2008, I consider probably until this last year might have been the best storm chase spring on the plains. 2011, really solid year on the plains for sure. People really go a little bit overboard because of the super outbreak and how big of a chase season that was. It was above average on the plains, but everything was biased to east. There was a lot of wet storm modes, that sort of thing. It's not, I don't even know if it's in my top 5 seasons I've ever chased, but it had one of my top days ever, May 24, 2011. 2013, again, people get really fired up about this, but if you're watching this and you don't know this is about to shock you, but until May 15th in 2013, we thought that was the worst year ever for storm chasing because there was nothing. Just the whole season was dead until that point. And then from May 15th to May 31st, there was a lot of stuff to see. So that year ended up being a pretty decent one for storm chasing if you were chasing then and you saw that stuff. You didn't get many options, many opportunities, but you saw stuff. And then 2012 was a year that really had a pretty decent early start on the plains, but then was gone. It was done. So yeah. That one wasn't a great chase season in terms of everything we saw. Now, when you're talking about some commonalities amongst the analog years, when I'm talking about commonalities, okay, I'm not talking about basically like all these years have this in common. This is absolutely going to happen. I'm talking about general trends here, things you can extrapolate. Analogs are an imperfect science, in my opinion, especially on this sort of stuff. But the things I think you do see on these, first off, an eastern bias tornado count. You see that a lot where there's a lot of tornadoes in the Mid-South and the Southeast. There just tends to be a lot of tornadoes in those areas on a lot of these years. Also, the other trend is on the other side of tornado country on the high plains. You see lower tornado counts, especially through June 30th. A weird quirk that you see on these years is that a lot of them have above normal tornado counts in the summer on the high plains. So talking like northeast New Mexico up through eastern Montana. They tend to have like a long tail of summer activity, which isn't abnormal, but it's a little bit more than normal. And so that's something to keep in mind. But this outlook, I'm not going to touch on that. This is only for spring, but that's just something I'm keeping in mind throughout the spring. If it stinks, maybe that give me hope if things are bad out there. Maybe the summer can save me. But also, very slow starting seasons. Very low tornado counts until late March nationwide. Very common. I think you're even seeing this in model data now showing up where It's not going to be that many tornado setups in the first half of March. So would not be surprising to see this season get off to a slow start. The plains are usually even later than that. You're going into April and even May. 2013 was May really before it really got going. So you can get some really late starting stuff. Now, here's the one that's going to shock you. Okay, there's a pretty common distribution of tornadoes otherwise. Shocker of the century, there's going to be tornadoes in May. Who knew? Who knew? Right? So typically, the interesting thing about that though is that a lot of years there's like a peak in early May, late April, a dip in mid-May, and then like another like concentration in late May. I do not know why that is. Not even going to pretend to say I know or no, could even postulate a hypothesis on it, but it does show up on many of these years. So, book your vacations for May 10th to May 20th, apparently, because I'm probably going to have spoken that into existence to spite me. Okay. And also, there's lots of years with long stretches of quiet in the middle of the season. And when I'm talking about long stretches, some years it's like 3-4 weeks in April and May of nothing. And this is a pretty common thing. You see this a lot of years. So it's something to keep in mind, okay? Okay, taking a look at some of the differences now between all of these years. There's lots of variation in the overall national tornado count and plains tornado count in these years. Touched on it already, but there's years where there's nothing. Like 1989 was a very dead year. Not a lot going on that year tornado-wise. And then, of course, you have some pretty busy years in there, especially like 2008, 2011, etc. But the other thing that I noticed is that for a few years there, the dry line is way west with very strong activity in the panhandles. While most years the dry line is shaded quite a bit east, there are a few years where that dry line is backed up way west. And we'll talk about that, but there's a couple analog years that have some pretty quiet mid-south and southeast tornado counts as well, but strong plains tornado counts. So when you dive into it, and if you really go looser with this, because there's a lot of really loose matches, it goes all over the place. Like it kind of reverts toward average. So you don't want to, going too broad is not going to serve any purpose here. This is a big difference. Last few years, it felt like analogs were all kind of pointing in the same direction. This year, they're kind of pointed in every which way. So I don't think analogs are as reliable this year. This is not your year to put your hat on any specific year. For an historical example of what's coming. We're going to leave that in. I don't know what Sam's doing back there. But some of the older analog years don't match the overall background environment of a drier Southwest and warmer global and oceanic temperatures overall. When you're talking older, I'm talking 1970, 1974, 1967, those older ones. Those are the ones where those were the westward biased dryline years too. So that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about the overall seasonal forecast. The outliers are older in a background environment that's a lot different than it is today. It just is, okay? And also, there's low confidence in analogs being a reliably great guide this year. I think they definitely helped influence the overall outlook, but it's because I kind of put my thumb on the scale a little bit. Like I read into it there's a little bit of preconceived like biases and stuff, I think, going into it, given what we're looking at. So speaking of Southwest drought, that's where we're at right now. Look at this. Lots and lots and lots of drought. Abnormal dryness developing here over the central U.S. Drought up here in the northern U.S. Lots of drought. The cap source region is very dry. Going to be very dry, very hot this spring. Bigger caps. Just going to happen. Unfortunately, there's going to be some big caps out there this year. If you look at another sign of the drought, right here, snowpack. You get some pretty decent snowpack when you get up here to northern Colorado, southern Wyoming, and back here, even back further to the west. Look at some of this out here in Oregon, but that's not going to play a huge role. This plays a very minor role in how days evolve, capping all that, but really it's just a sign of how dry things are. Southern New Mexico, 0% of expected snow, far southern New Mexico, which has been a very common thing recently. And of course, 1-3, etc. There's just not much snow. The ground out here is very dry. It's going to warm up quite a bit. And actually going to be a big wildfire risk this year, I think. Snow map, this is for the 25th of February. You can see that. Some pretty good snow out here in the Colorado Rockies. Decent snow, places like the Wasatch, up here, Yellowstone, Teton, etc. But most of the country, as we head into late February, is snow-free, okay? This won't change that terribly much at this point. There'll probably be some clippers, that sort of thing, but I'm not expecting a huge change in the snow outlook. So to recap where we're at current conditions wise, there's very low snowpack. Again, very low over the Southwest, very low snowpack in the plains right now. Drought's increasing, very much so. It's actually sadly getting worse and worse. It's not going to get better either short term. There's like zero hope for that getting any better. And then, of course, there's some, just to put that in plain English, those are negative. If you see both of those happening, that's not a good sign for tornadoes on the plains during the spring. If it's dry and getting drier, droughts have a weird tendency to last until they don't. And sometimes they break during tornado seasons, but sometimes they go beyond the tornado season. So also, the oceanic conditions are a unique blend of weakening La Nina, don't know what I was doing there. I think that meant to be a period. That was supposed to be a period. I know it was, but yeah, it's a unique blend of a weakening La Nina. It's not a very common way that this happens. So it's interesting there. So let's go to the models, okay? Let's go to the models. And I'm going to take myself off of here so you can see everything. This is just one. This is the CFS, March, April, May, June. I hope you notice a trend here. The orange, warmer colors are dry. Greens are wetter than normal. Obviously showing March. Very dry across most of the country. I think this is getting ready to play out. April, lots and lots and lots of dryness. Interestingly, not maybe back here in West Texas. What's going on there? We're going to have to keep our eyes on that. If that were something that were to verify, right? But May, look at this. Oh no. And this is like wetter than normal up here. But typically when you see this kind of a signal, but dry down here, it's not usually a good severe weather sign, especially for May. And as you go into June, you see a little bit of improvement here in the Central Plains, Southeast. You can tell when it's wet down here in June in the Southeast, you're getting that summertime pattern really kick in. Probably a pretty strong ridge. Jet's going to be moving up. That's not abnormal. It's pretty normal for that time of year. Another model to look at. This one is the NMME. This is an ensemble, kind of a collection of several different models. I like this one a lot. Ensembles, you should know why you like ensembles if you watch this channel. Shame on you if you don't. I'm kidding. You should watch our guides on weather models, so you'll learn a lot. March, April, May, and June, again, you see a very common trend in this combination of models. To be sure, you see dry. In March, maybe a little wetter out here. April, kind of normal-ish here across Oklahoma, but drier or wetter out here toward Missouri and then to the Midwest. Drier in the Southeast, though, for April. Interesting. Then you have May. Again, very similar to April, showing a little bit of a wetter signal, but definitely drier. And then June, just much drier across the plains. Pretty strong signal, actually, for the NMME. Then you go into CanSIPS. This is Canadian. I don't think I need to break this down too much through May. That's dry. And then you get into June and it starts changing. I think the monsoon season is going to be really active, really rocking out here in the Southwest U.S. for the record, but that's not that encouraging, right? And then a quick look. Here's the Euro from earlier this month. You can see once again, this one's the most optimistic, but this is now a lot of models were kind of optimistic-ish early this month, but they've all seemed to turn negative. It seems like the last month or two. So this might just be the last dying gasp of hope on the models. So dry spring for the plains incoming, according to models. Very strong signal, though, of an eastern bias dry line. You see that over and over again with the dry southwest panhandles, high plains. Very dry high plains, dry northern tier. You see that as well, especially like in the April and then May. You see that popping up quite a bit. And even into June, that's not too great. North Dakota, maybe some hope up there, right? But dry. That's just the best way to put it. Models are incredibly dry the whole way through. So what do the experts say? This is also important. I think it's, I'm a big believer in this. I'm a big believer in like checking my forecast with what people who do this for a living say, because as much as I wish this was my job, this is not my job. So people who look at it every day, it's kind of nice to know what they're saying as well. Well, here's the precipitation. March, April, May. That looks familiar, doesn't it? That looks pretty familiar. Below normal out here, New Mexico, Arizona, Four Corners region, but all the way out here, below normal, more often than not. Out here all the way into eastern Oklahoma, the widest equal chances. That does not mean near normal. Could mean near normal, could mean above normal or below normal too. So just so you know, when you see that white on these maps, does not mean that it's normal. It means that it could be drier or wetter than average. There's equal chances of both of those possibilities. So generally speaking, I think this does speak to an eastern bias dry line. For sure. The interesting thing, though, possibly just due to uncertainty, but also possibly due to a little bit of turning in the data, is that dry area does shave back April, May, and June a little bit. So you see that dryness kind of pare back a little bit, and more of the plains is on the equal chances, above normal, below normal. So that tells you that March, early April, expecting it to be pretty dry. Later part, May into June, maybe not. So that's something to keep in mind. So another thing that I think is very important, and I've done this most years on this outlook, and I feel like this is the one area it seems like we are getting right every single time. So I'm saying that so I can set myself up for failure on this. Here's where I think the dry line is going to be a lot of the year on average. There you go. Basically yellow out here, not much dry line action at all. Anything between the two greens is where I think the dry line will end up a lot of the time. And then, of course, I just drew where I think if there was like a very one spot average, I think it would probably be in here somewhere, right around I-35, classic I-35 dry line. Obviously, this is not ideal for a tornado season for a lot of reasons. Most notably, you have Oklahoma City, you have Dallas, you have Wichita, some pretty big metros there that would be impacted if the dry line were to set up west on the western end of this. So very common for a year like this, though, is for the dry line to march east. I think you'll see a lot more dry lines out here to the east and then pairing back to the west. Okay, toward May, which again follows a year like 2011 pretty closely, but it's going to be a lot of these trees out here, a lot of these trees for sure this year. So my top line conclusions, let's talk about this, okay? The bulk of tornado activity this year, this is my summation of the outlook. This is my official outlook, so to speak. The bulk of the activity this year is going to be biased east. It's going to be possibly even mostly east of the plains. That's a big possibility this year. You could end up in a situation where the plains have a really bad season in terms of storm chasing. But I don't think the plains are going to be incredibly quiet. I think there will be some days there's going to be some surges in activity, but it's going to be sporadic. I do. I think this year it's a year of fits and spurts. I think it's a year where you get this week in April and then like 3 weeks off and then like this week or two in May and then that's your season. Congratulations. I hope you enjoyed it. So basically, if you have a chasecation with set days right now, whatever deity you pray to, whatever sacrifices you need to make, you should do it now because it's going to be feast or famine, I think, this year. I think you're either going to be like chasing the pattern of a lifetime type of thing, or you're going to be setting under very not stormy skies. Okay. I think it's going to be a year of extremes for folks who chasecation. Lower plains activity is going to start late and end early. By that, I mean, I think that's probably like April, end in May, like no real June activity on the lower plains. I think that's probably right. That one's not as big of a confidence, but I think that's probably right. And then I've already talked about this, but the high plains will be quiet until summer, and then the things will pick up. So uncertainties. What are some of the things that I think are really making this hard this year? Because I think this outlook is a lot harder than it has been the last few years. First thing is capping. I think there's going to be really strong capping through much of the spring because of that hot and dry capping source region. So there's going to be a lot of days with that explosive boom or bust type of energy. There's going to be days that would have produced tornadoes this year that are not going to produce tornadoes this next year simply because the cap is going to wreak havoc on some chase days, okay? The storm track has been biased south, though, for a few months. So if this does continue into spring with that cap, it's only going to take 1 or 2 days to absolutely change the numbers in a big way, okay? This could be a year where the numbers are down outside of like 2 days, which are huge, but then like there's not much otherwise. That could be the type of year we're looking at for sure. But the total number of tornado days, I do feel is likely to be down. That lends itself to uncertainty because the number of days there's going to be possibilities is going to be lower than it has been. And I think that's going to lead to that feast or famine type of thing for chasecationing, but also the numbers, big dynamic variability in the numbers, because I do think with that capping, the warmer Gulf, we might have those days where lots of instability under a strong cap with strong shear. Is it going to break? Is it not? Who knows? And I think that's going to be a big determinant factor on our numbers this year, because if those days go big, numbers may go bonkers. But if they don't, a very quiet year could be in store. So if I were drawing out cold zones, hot zones this year, this is what I would come up with, this is what I did come up with. Basically here in Mid-South, Arkansas, Tennessee, Northern Mississippi, Alabama, Missouri, Ohio Valley region. Think there's going to be fewer tornadoes up here this year. Nebraska and Iowa had their fill of them last year, I think, and they're going to get the year off. And then I think the area where I have the most uncertainty is this zone back here. Don't know yet, honestly, how it will turn out. I don't think anybody does. Depending on where that dry line sets up, how May sets up, this hot zone could be paired back into Oklahoma a bit or not, but I do think the tornado numbers are going to be biased south this year, okay? Now, my numbers forecast. I'm doing this very reluctantly, admittedly. I am not. This is a year. I don't usually do numbers, but I'm going to do it this year just to kind of throw a little bit more out there just to see what happens. If I'm wrong, you can come back in June and really be mad at me. But I think this is for the plains too, not the southeast. The plains-ish region. I'm counting kind of Arkansas in this. Also, only for March and through June. Don't October outbreaks, etc. I don't know. Not even going to try to do that. But I think we're going to be near normal on the plains. I do. I think we're going to be plus or minus 20% on either side, which basically means there's going to be tornadoes. There's going to be setups to chase. It's going to be there. It's not going to be entirely quiet. It's not going to be a record quiet year. There's going to be stuff out there. There is a bigger downside risk than upside risk this year in terms of the numbers, though. I think the models being so dry right now really gives me a lot of pause. A lot of pause, honestly. But to really kind of bring something just kind of obvious to me at least is 2013 was a dry spring too. And there was a lot of chasing to be had. Okay, so just because it is dry does not mean there aren't tornadoes. Very important thing to keep in mind. But I do think that 15% is for well above normal. It's reserved for those years where you do get the outbreaks that happen. Those days that could go big do go big. And you get a lot of tornadoes, okay? I think that's where those line up. So I just want to say off the top, this is a very low confidence forecast. Or off the top. I want to say in conclusion, this is a very low confidence forecast. The last few forecasts I felt like were slam dunks and they felt easy, honestly. It was like a layup. Just throw the ball up. It's going to be easy. But this year, I do think there's a lack of strong analog signals either way. I think the models are signaling a dry spring, but I'm reluctant with the big like warmth and the Gulf, that sort of thing, the southern storm track we've seen. And the presence of some analogs that quite honestly were pretty big years. It all gives me pause. I'm not going to call for a below average year, even though models are very indicative of that. So I'm not going to do that, but I am very low. My confidence level is very low this year. However, I am very confident on two things, I think. I think there's going to be an eastward biased dry line. I think tornadoes are going to be biased eastward. I think we're going to be seeing places like Sapulpa, Henrietta, Okemah, Junction City, Kansas, Baxter, Kansas. I think Baxter Springs, Kansas, Springfield, Missouri, Fort Smith, Arkansas. Those are places we're going to see a lot of this year chasing. And we're going to see a whole lot less of Amarillo, Lubbock, that sort of thing. So I think that's a very high confidence. And then also, I do think there's going to be fewer chase days. I think the season's going to be less regular. We're not going to have weeks of activity. It's going to be very obvious when the pattern is great for chasing and when you need to be out there. And it's going to be very obvious when it's not. And I think that's going to be a pretty common thing this spring. So with that said, that's the forecast. I hope you enjoyed this interruption from Sam and Fitzgerald and all. But hope you enjoyed this. And I hope to see you out there. If you see me out there, say hey. Can't wait to see people out there this year. Going to be a interesting spring, at least in terms of storm chasing. So we'll see. That said, remember weather's for everybody. That includes you. We'll see you next time. There you go. Sam's ready for the season. Yeah, you are. You ready? There we go. You ready for the season, Sam? Yeah?